This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. A little something different today. My guest is Charles Poliquin. He is recognized as one of the world's most successful strength coaches. Olympic athletes, pro athletes, you name them, Charles has trained them. A world of experience. For those of you out there that want to get in better shape, for those of you that want to start getting into any kind of shape, I think Charles' insights are a great starting point. There are no great tricks. There are no great shortcuts. But there are better ways to think about health and strength and exercise. My guest today definitely brings that perspective home hard. Also, in my unique world where it seems like there's a connection to everybody, and maybe it's not even 6 degrees of separation anymore. Maybe it's just a couple degrees. Charles is actually on my show in a roundabout sort of way because I know Ed Sakota. A great conversation. I hope you enjoy. Charles, my first question, considering my audience, and my audience is diverse, and I have a lot of diverse guests on my show, I would love to know the connective tissue, the rationale, the reason, how it came to be that you and Ed Sakota have connected.
We're producing together a seminar for executives who want to improve their performance. Obviously, within the training communities, highly respected. And in my community, I'm highly respected, but I've worked with a lot of executives by default. So my background is to work with Olympic athletes and professional athletes, and I have a very successful business doing so. Elite athletes tend to associate with elite people in the business world, and they used to come to my center. So I saw the need for developing educational programs, because if you look at the successful executive, his mindset is very much the same as an Olympic athlete, but they just have different goals. But their mindset is the same, but they also have the same problems like concentration, sleep, memory, and so on.
But let me take you a step back. I want to dig deeper here. I want to know how you and Ed connected for the first time.
We've actually never connected face-to-face yet. It was through a colleague of mine who had done a lot of his work, and she reached out to him to connect the two of us.
You just saw the instant, the way he's thinking, the way you think, the way, even though it's different disciplines, you saw the commonality just instantly, I assume.
Correct. Success leaves clues. There's a lot of things that successful people do that are common, whether it's Schwarzenegger or Ed or the world champion in powerlifting or the Olympic medalist in shot put. There's a lot of things that are the same. For example, the growth mindset, the ability to take calculated risk, and so on.
As we start this episode, I want to read something from your website that I thought was great. It really made me think immediately, and it was very simple. Just a few sentences. Let me read this through really quick for the audience so they have some perspective as to where we're going to go today. There is no such thing as discipline. There is only love. Love is the most powerful creative force in the universe. You are the result of what you love most. You either love finely etched muscular abs more than donuts, or you love donuts more than washboard abs you could do your laundry on. It is simple as that. Don't beat yourself up that you have no discipline or further drown yourself in a sea of refined carbs out of guilt. Admit that you like crappy food more than you love strength. That sums it up, doesn't it?
Very true, because, you look at it, you have two ways you can make choices in life. You can make choices out of fear, or you can make choices out of love. If you make all your choices out of love, you're going to be very successful and very happy. If all your choices are fear-based, you're not going to go anywhere in life.
It's simple, but there's so much depth behind that, because a significant part of the population, including myself at some points in time, we all result back to the fear motivation.
Correct. I mean, it's human nature, but especially if you grew up Catholic like I did, I mean, shame and blame were the two motivating forces, right? You were taught to fear and feel shame, and your parents would blame you, and that fosters a lot of negative output in your life. If you say to yourself, okay, everything I'm going to do from now on is based on love. Do I prefer to have a healthy life with my children than my grandchildren? Then you'll make the right choices. But if you prefer to stuff yourself with Krispy Kremes, then you prefer to stuff with Krispy Kremes. But at the end, there's no discipline. I think that discipline is a myth. And that article is actually my most popular article on this website, and the one that is most translated. I think we're up to 76 languages it's been translated in. So I figured that out a long time ago. For people who were successful, they didn't really experience the economy of discipline. It's just they love doing this more than anything else.
You mentioned your religious background, and now I look at you today and I see words like Sensei is part of your vocabulary. So clearly you've made a transition, and I'm gathering from using a phrase like Sensei that many of the Eastern traditions have drowned out perhaps some of your initial religious upbringing.
I was Canada's second youngest black belt at the age of 14, and I've done 6 different martial arts. But what I think about the Eastern philosophies is that the vision of what you do and the consequences is very different than I grew up as a Catholic, so I'm more into karma and Buddhist trends in my life just by having done both and seeing what it does to what it did to my life and what it does on a daily basis.
Why don't we go back in time, though, since you just mentioned your youth, and I think for most people, most males, even if they were competitive athletes, and I played baseball into my first year in college. But to hear as a 14-year-old black belt, we, for those of us that did some sports, we know that that's a certain amount of dedication, certain amount of athletic prowess. Why don't you talk about yourself as a young man and what was driving you to some of that early athletic achievement?
Well, to be fair, when people ask me what you want to do when you grow up, I wanted to be Tarzan. I thought you had the ideal lifestyle, didn't have to wear clothes, they were too fancy, could exercise every day, save the world. Early on, I thought Tarzan was the man. And then a man tried to molest me when I was 10 years old. And I luckily survived. And then my father said, you need to do something to protect yourself. So I said, can I do karate? So I started to do karate, but as soon as I put my gi the first day, I fell in love with the activity. I love it in the fact that you have to be concentrated. You can't have ADD and be a black belt in karate. So, the power of focus, breaking my first board, and so on. And then what happened is that one day, back then you had to listen to the news to know what the weather was going to be. They forecasted a snowstorm. That was a Friday night. So it's okay, the buses won't run as usual because there'd be too much snow. So I woke up extra early, had breakfast, and walked to the dojo. And there was short and young, and then snow up to my knees, and I just walked all the way there. And then once I got to the dojo, I was the only kid who showed up. Not because I had discipline, because I loved karate more than staying at home and watching cartoons. So my sensei said to me, I'll drive you home, but since I'm already here, I'm going to work out. And I said, what do you mean you're going to work out? Because I'm going to lift weights. Well, in 1975, people who lifted weights were actual weirdos. They were a subculture. They used to hang around together. So the weightlifters, the powerlifters, the bodybuilders, they all hang around. There was no such a thing as separate gyms. There was just the iron that was a common friend. I said, well, can I do it? And he goes, sure. So, and there's such a thing in my field called the iron bug, and I got bit by the iron bug that same morning. I really loved it. So I said, okay, I'm going to lift. So I asked my older brother, can I get some weights? And he was the first one to give me those cement block wrapped in plastic cheap weights, with a rusted bar that I spent my Sunday afternoon unrusting with foil, getting rid of the rust. And then every time with some spare money, I would buy, little plates and more weight. At the age of 17, after working as a waiter in Japanese restaurants, I was able to afford a Swedish Olympic barbell, which was, they're still the best in the world. Bought that, and I started training athletes out of my house. One guy at the gym who was on the national volleyball team said, "Hey man, you're pretty strong. Can you write me my program?" I was already in first year university, and that was my first national team athlete I started to train. So that's how it started. It was just me showing up because I wanted to do karate. There was no karate because of the snowstorm, and I lifted weights, fell in love with it. Even my sensei, which I see on a regular basis, was very proud that I chose to name myself the Strength Sensei, because in my first book, I acknowledged that he's the man who showed me how to lift weights first.
As you mentioned, this rather traumatic event that happened in your youth, and then you mentioned shifting to the martial arts and weightlifting. This traumatic event that happens, obviously there's feelings of like, wow, I don't have full control here, or I can't defend myself as much as I'd like. At what age were you when you knew pretty much you could defend yourself as a male against all comers? And if you couldn't defend yourself, perhaps you were going to die. But when was that moment, that age where you knew after all this training and all this work that you could defend yourself and nothing was going to ever happen to you again?
Probably by age 12, I was already a blue belt. So, it's not a black belt yet, but I had enough skills to realize that I could do it. And then once I started to lift weights, of course, that went exponentially. And over the years, I've done a lot of different martial arts, because there's not a perfect martial art. I would say it's 12 was the start of the inflection point in the curve. And then another point at age 14 when I started to lift weights. There was no looking back after that. But
what was that feeling, though? That feeling of at one point being, okay, I don't have complete control, or I feel a little that someone can hurt me. What was that feeling like to where, because I don't think some people ever get this feeling of control and the ability to defend themselves. And of course, many women, my girlfriend is a smaller lady, she's never going to have the sense of, she's actually participating in martial arts too, and she's pretty tough, but she's never going to be the size of perhaps you, of course. And so that feeling that you had where you go at one moment, wow, I don't have control, but that inner feeling of like, I know I can take care of myself. That's a special transition, isn't it?
Yes, but you know what? It's like I always tell in my classes, once you're the alpha wolf, then you don't have to prove anything, One of my favorite authors is Robert Sapolsky, who wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. One of his best books is A Primate's Memoir, where he describes how monkeys, social hierarchy is built around confidence and so on. You could say that it does have a dramatic effect on your confidence. And there were other instances where I did actually need to apply my skills, but it was nice to know that I could do it.
Predators avoid confidence, don't they?
Correct. That's why they pick on kids. The thing that saved my life is that scene in an Hercules movie. You'll laugh. I saw an Hercules movie. A bad guy was fighting Hercules, and he threw sand in Hercules' face. So I was smaller than, of course, the predator, and I was playing with cars, and there was like gravel. And I knew I was in danger. So I just grabbed the gravel, threw it in his face, ran to my neighbor's backyard, jumped over the fence, which I did every day, and then got back to my parents' house and alerted my brother, who chased the guy. But it's kind of funny that I got the trick to get out of that situation by watching a Hercules movie.
Charles, I saw some pretty sure recent pictures of you, and I'd love to know your age, because physically, if I see those pictures, I'm saying to myself that most men, regardless of age, including guys in their late teens, early 20s, would be, I don't necessarily want to say jealous. I don't think jealous, but I think perhaps they might be envious, or perhaps they might be inspired. So how old are you right now, Charles?
I'm 54.
I think a great place, a great jumping off point. There's a lot of males that listen to my podcast, and I see, in my world, I see all different types of physical prowess in men. I see young programmers at 22 whose bodies just look atrocious. And I'm 47. I can go out and run sprints at the track. I do yoga all the time. I do CrossFit. I swim. I try to. I'm engaged. But I see so many young guys that are not, and older guys too. But I think what would be a great inspirational time for you right now is to perhaps speak to those people that either have an excuse or they've given up or they don't realize that the body is pretty malleable and it will recover in many ways if you just give it a little work, right?
Correct. I mean, there's studies that were done in Florida with 90-year-old males, so it's not like they're actually chicken springs, and they can do, if they lift weights 3 days a week, 40 minutes, after 12 weeks, their biological age reverses to age 55, right? So that means that a 90-year-old man is better than a 75-year-old man, 65-year-old man, et cetera, et cetera. So he's back down to 55, and that's only after a few months of strength training.
What's going on there physically? How does that take place?
Well, there's a phenomenon called sarcopenia, which, if you look at the etymology of the word, it means muscle death. So as you age, some of your muscle cells simply die because of inactive use. And also what happens is that you also get what we call fat marbling. So the spine muscles tend to look like Kobe beef, it's full of fat. The muscle is marble with inflammatory fat. In the spine muscles of these 90-year-old, what you see is that if you start training them, those muscle fibers atrophy, but the fat marbling is gone. The most important thing to remember, Michael, is the concept of progression, not perfection. I think what happens is that what discourages people is that they want perfection and they want it 3 weeks ago. The most common question, yesterday I was doing a consult for a client, and the guy was only 34, he had his body fat was over 40%. And I said to him, listen, progression, not perfection. And then, how long did it take you to get fat? And the guy laughed, and I said, well, don't expect miracles. I don't walk on water. But I said he could be in decent shape where people notice it by the end of the year. So by Christmas, we're just in October. If you do October, November, December, people will notice. I guarantee, because I've done plenty of times. And it's like anything else, If I want dental work, I don't go see a garage man. If I want financial advice, I don't see a policeman. So you have to, if you don't know what you're doing, get some help. And, even if the person just designs you a program and shows you how to do it, for a mere $75, you're better off than trying to figure it out yourself. Always hire expertise, and that will save you time. I think that's the best way to get to it. And the thing is that you could get the most important thing that I tell people is that there's a huge mathematical difference between training 4 days a week versus training 3 days a week. So I tell people, can you commit 4 hours a week to training? Yes. And then let's say Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, split the body in half. In 4 months, people won't recognize me. It's not that much work, and the most important thing is to avoid cardio, because cardio further stresses the adrenal glands. It makes you insulin resistant. So strength training, even the top cardiologists like Bijan Porat will tell you that the best way to avoid cardiovascular disease is actually strength training.
Talk about the cardio aspect again, because I've seen you use the expression, and I've actually heard it quite a bit too, skinny fat. So talk about skinny fat and how cardio affects this ultimate result of skinny fat. Define skinny fat.
Well, skinny fat is a person with low muscle mass but high percentage of body fat. So they may look thin, but the quality of the body is horrendous. So, people think that marathon runners are lean. They have lean limbs, but they take their shirt off. They don't look so lean because they're not lean. There's 6 major problems with cardiovascular work. I'm talking about slow, long-distance work. I'm not talking about interval training, so let's make that difference. But people go for a run, let's say a 20-minute run or a 20-minute bike ride, 20-minute row, but at an even pace. My biggest peeve is brain aging. What we know now is that the more cardiovascular, low, long-distance type someone has done, the faster their brains have aged. So at the Olympic levels, the athletes with the worst brain functions are like cross-country skiers, rowers, and so on. And all the anaerobic sports, the short-term explosive sports, the guys still have their heads, right?
That's just fascinating comment. Break that apart for us.
Well, the thing is that when you do aerobic work, the slow long distance one, you make this stress hormone called cortisol. Well, cortisol oxidizes your brain. In English, it means it rusts your brain. It makes damage to your brain. The same way metal, you can have cast iron and it turns it to rust. Well, that's, iron plus oxygen. When you do a lot of aerobic work, your brain actually gets older. Who wants to get older in the brain? I mean, everybody that I know, my age group, wants to have a younger brain. They realize they only got one, and they've got to take good care of it. So that's my number one pet peeve with aerobic work. Second thing is that Dr. Schwarzbein, who's probably the best endocrinologist in relation to diabetes, is against aerobic work because she says that fat people who do aerobic work actually worsen their health at the adrenal level, but also the insulin sensitivity issue. And then, Alzheimer's is now considered type 3 diabetes, in other words, late age diabetes. And then when you become more insulin resistant from cardio, you actually accelerate brain aging from another means, okay? Reason number 4 I don't like cardiovascular work is that you will need amino acids from your body to repair the damage, which is normal. But the body has only so much of an amino acid pool, right? And the amino acid pool, you have to make choices. So the amino acids that go towards cardiovascular recovery are not going towards muscle recovery. Tufts University in 1982 demonstrated that the best predictor of how old you're going to live is actually muscle mass. Number 2 predictor is actually strength. So those beat things like blood pressure, cholesterol profile, inflammation profiles, and so on. So if you look at it, Michael, the top 2 things that will show, that could predict accurately how old you're going to live is number 1, muscle mass, number 2, strength. And we know from a physiological standpoint that cardiovascular work interferes with muscle strength and muscle mass.
Contrast for something like long distance running and the jogging and what people typically think of as good, healthy stuff. Now, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've tried to keep up a fairly regular sprinting practice. I'll go out to the track with some friends or whatever, and I'll probably try to do, just depending on how I feel, 6 to 10, 80 to 100 meter sprints, full bore. I mean, we might not be at the track for 20 to 30 minutes, but after that, I'm done. I don't have anything left. I give it all that I got. And I'm not trying to do any kind of crazy distance, but I have to tell you, the feeling that I have at that moment and the next couple days, and then what it does to my body in terms of people say, hey, sit-ups. I'm sprinting. Am I completely crazy?
No, you're actually exactly on the right track. So look at it this way. We're designed to throw a rock at a rabbit or run and throw a rock at a rabbit, or we're not designed to run after the rabbit. So basically, when we do sprints, we're mimicking how we used to feed ourselves. So let's say if you want to kill a bison and you do a 100-meter sprint to throw him a javelin or spear, that makes sense. So sprints are great for you because you got to look at the hormonal response of a sprint versus long-distance cardio. It's completely different. One of the things that happens when you do sprints is you produce more of this hormone called growth hormone. And growth hormone is what repairs connective tissue in your body. Growth hormone is what burns fat. Growth hormone is the hormone that prevents you to lose muscle mass with age. So the more growth hormone you produce, the better you're off. But the best way to do that is either strength training or sprinting.
Let me throw something out about weightlifting. So I probably started weight training at the age of 12, and I was really dedicated until about the age of 19, 21. And I took about 8 to 10 years off, and now in a CrossFit type regimen and some kettlebell work. I'm not by any stretch doing what I was doing when I was like 20, which is really heavy squats and really heavy bench press. But one of the myths that people have about weight training is that, okay, these young guys are going to do all this weight training, they're going to increase their muscle mass, and then when they get old, they're going to be fat. And here's the worst thing about that thought, is that thought gets connected to something like the current pictures that one of the most infit men ever in terms of weights. Arnold Schwarzenegger goes out now at the age of 68 and walks around the beach, and people go, oh, that confirms my view. Arnold Schwarzenegger did all this weight work, and now look at him now. Why don't you break that apart for people? Those are some really wrong conclusions, aren't they?
Correct. I mean, I haven't seen recent pictures of Schwarzenegger, but let's say if there's a case where his body fat is up and he used to be shredded. Well, there's also the contrast. In other words, there's a difference between 2% body fat when you're 35 years old and you weigh 110 kilos of muscle mass versus he's 68 years old. His priorities have obviously changed in life. But if the ones I've seen recently, and actually I saw him in
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I saw some pictures 3 or 4 years ago and he was, just having fun or something. But
no, but because I went to a VIP lecture group because I was teaching at the Arnold Classic in Melbourne. Even wearing jeans and a shirt, I wouldn't say I would call him fat. So maybe he was because he was going through his divorce 4 years ago. You don't know what the exact circumstances, but from at least when I saw him in March, he looked pretty good.
The bigger issue that I really want you to address is the idea that just doing weights and increasing muscle mass, that the issue is if you do weights and increase muscle mass and then you stop exercising, it doesn't make a difference whether you did weights or not. If you stop exercising and eat bad, you're going to look bad. It's not connected to the weights.
Correct. And the other thing that we know from years of experience is that when you stop weight training, and let's say you've done it for 3 decades and you stop, you tend to return to the genotype you have. So, if you're an ectomorph, you go back to being skinny. If you had a tendency to be obese, you'll go back to obesity. So, but it certainly doesn't turn into fat because they're 2 different chemical reactions. So if you stop, let's say you live for 4 decades and you stop lifting, if you are fat now, it's because of the wrong choices you made. But you're 100% right. It's not muscle turning into fat. It's you starting to say, okay, you're going to lose that muscle mass because if you don't use it, you lose it. So, and then the other thing is, for example, I saw pictures of John Travolta in shape, and John Travolta, when he shirt off, he had the shape of a melted candle, right?
That's probably a better example than my Schwarzenegger example.
Or you see actors who get in shape for a movie like Superman or some action hero, and then they stop. Then, if they go back and eat pretzels and drink beer and sit on their butts watching reality shows, well, obviously they're going to get fat like anybody else does. It's not magic.
Talk about this. So one of your expressions that I know you're fond of saying, train like it's your last workout. So that requires a certain toughness mentally. And I'm curious, any advice you could give myself, other people listening, train like it's your last workout. I know that is tough as hell mentally. What are some of the ways that one can go about it? Or are you just going to come back to the love concept? Meaning, if you're going to, you have to want to train like it's your last workout because of love. Or are there any ideas and thoughts that you can give for people to toughen up mentally?
I think the best way to train like it's your last workout is actually to have 2 training partners, not 1, 2. I found from experience that there's always one out of the 3 that's up, one out of the 3 that's down, and one that's in the middle. And that role varies, right? One thing that I love to do still is betting. So I'll say, I'll bet you this, I can do that. And then when you've trained with the same guys for a long time, you know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you make fair bets. In other words, okay, if I do, let's say, 200 kilos on this, you got to do 250 kilos because you're much bigger and larger than me. So you keep pushing each other. Usually, what I found was is bet food. So, and because that's one of the most basic human things. So I'll say, okay, steak dinner if I do this, and then the guy will do, and then you could double or nothing, but that keeps up like a competitive spirit. The other thing that I find that's very important is to have goals with an expiry date. For example, I just spent the last month with Dmitry Klokov, who used to be world champion in weightlifting, silver medalist in weightlifting at the Olympics, and he retired from competition last April. And the students asked him, how do you keep that physique? He says, I pick a lift that's odd. He wants to do now a snatch with a 2-second pause at 200 kilos. There's no competitions for that. It's an odd lift. But he says, that's my goal this year. So mentally, he can't compare it to what he's done at the Olympics, but he's going to do something pretty impressive if you know the sport of weightlifting to do. I have found that the guys who stay in shape are still into goal setting. Because if it doesn't have an expiry date, it doesn't mean anything. There's no pressure. I mean, one of my good friends is Ed Cohn, who was world champion 12 years in a row in powerlifting. He's also in his 50s. Even though he's out of competition, he picks whatever lift to do for his age. There's actually a guy called Brooks Kubik who wrote a book about aging and weight training. It's a really good book. And he shows you like what's normal to lose with age, and he's got all the mathematical data. And once I read that book, I said, okay, well, I'm not doing too bad for 54, because on some lists I'm still 35 years old. So, that's how I motivate myself to do it. I think that it's an area where you have to engage your left brain. This is what I need to do by this date, and then that's how you stay motivated. But there's a social effect of training with two partners. For me, it's a bit hard to do because I travel so much. But I'll go to let's say Sydney or Kuala Lumpur or Helsinki. I'll pick one of my students and say, hey, tomorrow, do you want to do legs together, or do you want to do back together, or do you want to do arms together? And of course, because of my studies, they always want to. And my goal is to show them that I'm still the king.
Isn't that the trick? I mean, like, I love when I go out to the track this year, I can pretty much, there's only one guy, this Polish trainer who's in his late 20s, who he would beat me by a half meter or a meter, but I could beat everybody else in a sprint. And then I think back, I grew up around a bunch of wrestlers, so I have some instinctive idea about that. And, sometimes in the last couple of years, you get into some kind of wrestling screw around sessions with some young guy who's in his 20s and is in pretty good shape. And if you can still kind of get him, if you can get him off the ground and get a body slam, that's the whole thing. You've got to keep that competition going in your own head, don't you?
That's true. It's very true, Michael, because as soon as you stop wanting to be ahead, you'll regress, right? I mean, you have to be realistic. At my age, 54, I'm sure I beat pretty much a lot of guys my age. Can I beat the guys 18? No. But can I show them who's boss? Yes. And, so the thing is that, but sometimes I'll turn with a 35-year-old guy and I'll beat him, and then they'll go like, thanks for beating me, because now I know I got something to look for.
Right. Well, I'm sure you inspire a ton of people. I mean, just by that kind of that type of you just being you is inspirational, because people, even if they don't know you, they see pictures and the picture alone. But I'm sure it's much different if they meet you too. Hey, I want to keep digging apart some stuff here. Sleep. Talk about sleep. Sleep in your life. What you know about sleep. What lessons you can pass along about sleep.
Most of my life, I work 20 hours a day. That's a lot of hours, right? Mm. And, I didn't miss my workouts, whatever. If you were to ask me, if you redid your life, what would you do? I would say probably sleep more. People said, you're a very lucky man. Yeah, I was a very lucky man because I worked really hard and I didn't sleep. I did the work of 3 people per week, right? So that's how my luck increased when I did a volume. But having to sleep more, or knowing to sleep more, I would have reorganized my life and really picked up on priorities. People ask me, what was a turning point for you? Well, to become a father, if you want to be a real father and take care of your child, you have to have quality time. So that's when I started to cut back on work. Luckily, I got to read Tim Ferriss' book, become friends with Tim Ferriss, and then I said, okay, I've got to put things in perspective. But I would say sleep is the most underrated factor in the elite. I think that elite people are so driven that they say, you can sleep in a cemetery. I would disagree now. If there's a lesson I want to pass on to the younger generation, is to go for quality sleep. Because in the end, Michael, the amount of quality work you can do when you sleep is enormous. And then there's a friend of mine's an MD quoted me something a few years ago. The general who sleeps wins the war. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Churchill, all big military leaders were known to nap. So if you're not going to sleep 8 hours in a row, well, at least nap. And I'm a big believer in napping. And then they don't need to be long. A power nap with 20 minutes, in my opinion and my experience, is an extra 2 hours of sleep. So, and then there's quite a bit of evidence now, Michael, that fragmented sleep is actually good for you. So you don't have to sleep your whole 8 hours in a row. So, and apparently our ancestors did not sleep. I mean, our really old ancestors, we're talking 40,000 years ago, did not sleep 8 hours in a row. They did spread their sleep around. But I think that quality sleep is what I call an unfair advantage. And very few people know how important it is. But to repair tissue, you look at babies, I mean, they spend their time sleeping. Why? Because they're in a growth mode. But if you want to grow, you need to sleep. And I'm talking, if you want to grow your empire financially, you want to grow your strength, you want to grow your relationship, you have to be able to make the right decisions. And sleeping well is ultra important. So the general who sleeps the most wins the war.
You know, I was happy when I interviewed Tim Ferriss. My very first question I asked him was about wrestling, and I think I'm probably one of the first people that started to interview with him and ask him about wrestling. But anybody that's done some homework to truly know how he thinks would know that that's his inspirational moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim and I always have a great time when we get to talk.
You have trained Olympic athletes, pro athletes, some of the highest achievers, the world records, all that kind of fun stuff. Give me a few names, and I want to know why. The most impressive athletes that you've worked with, one or two. I know there's probably some that come to the top. And try and explain to us novices why they're so impressive to you.
Okay, the names are probably not household names by any means, which is unfortunate. The first name I'll name is Adam Nelson. Adam Nelson is the most medal man in history in shot put. What's unique? He's very short, so he's only 1.80 meters tall. Well, the guys who would beat him beforehand would be at least 2 meters tall, 2.10 meters. So you're talking practically a midget, you know, amongst giants. But he compensated for his lack of height through maximal power. So that guy was devoted in training. You know, his nickname should be Captain Dopamine. I mean, this guy, if you want the right mindset, that's the guy to talk to. He's a very inspiring, very dominating, very tough guy. I mean, he would come to my gym, everybody would lift 20% more. Didn't care if they were NFL or NHL stars. He's one of those guys with charisma, but he's a guy who won a silver medal in Athens, and then 8 years later, they found the guy who beat him positive for the Athens urine sample. So they gave him his medal, his gold medals 8 years too late. You know, That's not public knowledge. I mean, you could find it on Google if you wanted to, but I mean, for a guy to be that motivated and became world champion, it's not like he's been financed by a lot of people. I mean, this the guy got there through hard work.
There's an inner drive there that, given as many athletes that you've worked with, there's an inner drive that forces you to throw that out as the first name that I ask about.
Yes. So him, for sure. The second name is a Kenyan skier who won 2 bronze medals at the Olympics, Karen Percy. And she won a silver medal at the World Championships in downhill skiing. She, for me, is my favorite athlete I've ever worked with because she exuded concentration. I've never seen anybody who could joke around between sets, and when it was her turn to train, she was literally on another planet. I wish I could see what was inside her brain, but the dedication she put into that set was very inspiring. You've heard of expressions like you have to live in the moment. Well, this woman, you know, I'm not part of the selfie generation and the Instagram generation, you know, and probably even if I was 20 years old now, I wouldn't do it. It's not my personality, but that's the type of person that'd be worth taping to show people, okay, this is concentration. She started skiing way later than anybody else on the national team. She had done pretty much every sport known to man beforehand. So she was a latecomer, and despite that, she was Olympic medalist. So for me, the attitude and the inspiration the athlete provides is more important than the celebrity status.
You mentioned mindfulness, and I have to admit, I haven't really engaged enough, and I haven't really tried enough. But meditation, look, it's the love discipline thing. I've just not given it the love. But I do get to those moments of now that mindfulness through my yoga practice. And I do a very difficult vinyasa practice, sweat my rear end off, a lot of body weight stuff, some handstands and things like that. Talk about, from your experience observing or being around, what is your view about yoga?
Actually, yoga is very good. Again, if I could replicate my life, I would probably have done yoga much younger. I've done some intensively for about 4 months, 3 years ago. It's one of these things, if there was a 26-hour day, I would do yoga. I think that it's underestimated as a practice in the sports world. Because everything we do, those of us who are dopamine dominant, tends to be yang, like we're the fire, but the intensity of your flame is function of the oil reserve, which is a yin reserve. And as weight training is yang, yoga is yin, right? And there's a basic principle: the more oil you have in your lamp, the more the flame can burn. Yoga is the yin to the weight training. So I think that, let's say if Richard Branson tomorrow says to me, I want England to dominate the world, and I give you 8 years, right? And unlimited funds. Well, I would probably search out the best yoga instructors, and they would be responsible for probably 25% of the total training load. Because the advantage of yoga is that it's not depleting, it's repleting. It's something that I think I'm the first one to be guilty, and I'll admit it, to not have done enough with my athletes early on. I think it's a great practice, but it's like anything else. There's good lawyers or bad lawyers, there's good customs officers, bad customs officers. It's one of these cases where I would seek the best and then include it in my regimen.
I'm not about to brag about athletic prowess with you on the phone, given your experience and all of your clients, but I have to say I'm quite proud at the age of 47 as a 6 foot, 190-pound male that I can do the full splits. I know that's something that's very difficult for guys to do. And the only reason I can do that is because I tore my hamstring at age 15 playing baseball. And I just started stretching my hamstrings all the time. And it was kind of like, almost like your incident of the traumatic incident turning you into sports. My flexibility is a direct result of an injury.
Yes. I mean, the thing is that everybody gets an epiphany about why they start something, right? And then usually, the more severe the trauma, the more you will change. But to do the full splits at 47, that's pretty impressive for the listeners out there, because it does require quite a bit of commitment. Also, at your height, because typically flexibility is inversely proportionate to height. So that's why gymnasts are all short, Well, kudos to you, because it would take me, if I start today to make that my goal.
It's not a fun goal. It hurts.
Yeah, but anything worth achieving requires effort. Otherwise it's not worth achieving. It's like to make selection for Navy SEALs is really hard to do. That's why there's not a lot of Navy SEALs. But that's why those guys are the guys we rely on when we need special operations. So anything that's high status does require commitment. I mean, there's nothing effortless that's worth it.
You mentioned the Navy SEALs. I had a buddy in San Diego who was a SEAL, and he didn't live on Coronado Island, and he hung out downtown. And the interesting thing about him is he would just wear T-shirts and jeans, and he was probably 5'8", but probably over 200 pounds. But the way he carried himself, I don't know if a lot of kind of people would recognize it, but I recognized it. The quiet confidence that and I think the last I chatted with him, he was trying to get into SEAL Team 6, but the quiet confidence that man carried, just something very unique to see up close and personal.
Yeah, if he's the alpha lion, he doesn't have to prove it himself. So, I mean, if you could kill people with your bare hands, you don't have to show it off. It's the guys with low. Actually, if you look at research, it is the men with the lowest testosterones who are the most violent.
Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah, because, for example, Iran and Iraq have the lowest testosterones we know around the world. And then truth is truth. But the average onset of puberty in Iran and Iraq is age 17 for a male, which is really late. And the main reason is because the soil does not have any zinc. And you need zinc. The nickname for zinc is the great organizer. So zinc is what's responsible for testosterone production, HCl production, and so on. If you have low zinc, you have low testosterone. If you have, on top of that, a low meat intake, well, it's going to be hard to have a lot of testosterone, and that makes a lot of violent behavior. But I'll be politically incorrect both ways. Look at it as soccer hooligans in the UK or in Scotland or Ireland. When they were at their top, if you look and measure their testosterone levels, they were abysmal. Okay. For example, DHA sulfate values in the UK are between 1.6 and 1.8. So I had one of my students say, "Hey, I'm very male. Mine is 1.9." I said, "Actually, you don't qualify as a female in Canada because in Canada, DHA sulfate norm starts at 3 and ends at 10. So you're not even classified as a Catholic schoolgirl in Canada. So now leave me alone with your high testosterone." So, high testosterone actually decreases aggressiveness because you can kill all the other animals. So you don't need to prove your point. It's the guys with low testosterone, like the soccer hooligans, that do rampage all over the place.
If you look at the world through that lens, which is a physiological way of looking at the world, instead of saying, sociology or politics or something like that, if you look at it from the physics, the physiology, it really gives people a window. I mean, for example, and I'm not being politically incorrect. Everyone knows this is true. There is a high level of sexual violence towards women in India. I don't know the physiology issues going on with young Indian males.
They also have very low testosterone because a lot of them are vegetarians. Yeah, that's been quite demonstrated. Vegetarians, vegans have low testosterone.
What's funny too, talking to you, is because I think sometimes as we get older too, the notion of testosterone and the notion of being a male and being, I don't want to use the word tough, but I think to some degree there's a certain push in society to bring maleness down. Whereas, the whole idea that you could just make a vegan joke, you're not making it personal, you're not doing this, but you're just thinking big picture, all that you know about the body, and you're saying to yourself, well, it doesn't surprise me.
Yes. I mean, when I teach lectures, I always tell people, if you look at average blood values, what you have to picture is Homer Simpson, right? So being average, you're Homer Simpson. You're not Conan the Barbarian. Our physiology dictates our behavior. So men with low testosterone, because they have low zinc and they eat a vegan diet, will be violent towards women. Give them a steak, some HCl tablets and some zinc tablets, and they'll start behaving. It's a drama that people don't associate physiology with behavior. I mean, if you're a lion, you built a certain way, you're going to, if you take a lion and you give it the diet of what you give the fish in your fish bowl, he's not going to behave so well. And the same thing, if I throw a ribeye in the aquarium, the fish is not going to rush for it, right? So we have to eat according to our genes. There's been a huge castration effect of the male in the media. I mean, you look at heroes in sitcoms, they're all fat and stupid. Right?
It's true. It's true. Or emasculated, And then a guy like you is positioned as a caveman who's useless to society, and hopefully you'll go away soon.
Yes. But, the thing is that, for example, in the Western world, the men with the lowest levels of testosterone, I'm talking about Europe, are Danes, right? So if I'm going to be politically correct, I mean, as well name as many nations as I can. But conversely, Danish women have the highest levels of testosterone in the Western world. But where did feminism start? Copenhagen, okay? Men have been punished for being men, and the women have been glorified to take on men's position. I don't have a problem with gender equality, but I'm against castration. So, and the male's a male. I mean, I think that if we actually looked at biology and foster what we're designed for, I mean, you don't have to be sexist about it, but meaning that we have that type of plumbing for a reason, and she has that type of plumbing for a reason. And there's things, for example, I'll never be able to get pregnant, but that's an expression that irritates me. We are pregnant. No, you're not. Okay, because you're not carrying the baby, you're not staying up at night, it's not kicking inside your stomach. I find it's one of the dumbest expressions one can use. We are pregnant. No, she is pregnant, she's doing all the work. You did 8 seconds of work, maybe, and that's it.
Just 8 seconds, speak for yourself.
Yeah. You are pregnant?
Hey, Hey, just completely unrelated to this part of the conversation, but one of the things that I've gotten really intrigued at inside yoga, and my sport growing up was baseball, and I was a baseball catcher from age of like 10 to 21. I think that the squatting motion helped me with heavy squats. It's given me a very, for lack of a big term, big thighs, big hamstrings, big ass. The thing that I notice in Asia, which is really fascinating, is the Asian squat. I can't get as deep as most, for example, many Asian women can get, but I can get a few centimeters away, more so than most white guys probably could. What that does to my hips and the feeling and the flexibility and the ability to move, it's a fascinating, simple, even the weights, it's a fascinating, simple flexibility, strength exercise.
Yes, but also it's a osteoarthritis preventer. There's a very good Australian study where they measured knee and hip degeneration, okay, at the cartilage level, ligament level, but also at the bone level. And what they found is that age-matched Indians who are born in India and live in India have far less hip and knee degenerations than Indians born in Australia, which age match, because as soon as they adopt Australian culture, they don't full squat anymore. So full squatting is actually one of the best ways to prevent degeneration of the lower extremity and the spine. There's a very good set of data from the Swedish Olympic Committee that shows that the further your knees can travel over your toes, the least likely you're going to get injured in all types of sports injury, whether it's meniscus tears, hamstring tears, groin tears, and so on. And that study was further supported by a study on 40,000 Swiss soccer players. The deeper a kid could go in a squat, the least likely he's going to get injured playing soccer.
Hey, Charles, I didn't define the Asian squat. Why don't you define the Asian squat?
Basically, you squat so low that you can leave a stain on the carpet. That would probably be...
You're really trying to put your butt on the back of your ankles almost.
Correct. I mean, we call that ass to the grass squat. So the distance between your bum and the ground should be minimal. I mean, I'm exaggerating obviously when I say leave a stain on the carpet, but I find that dopamine increase in visuals always improve people's memory.
The testosterone violence connection that you're making, I'm sure if I went and did some homework, I would find that you're not the only person saying that. But when you talk about it like that, do you face criticism? Do people come at you and say, no way, forget it, that's not accurate?
No, because on my website, I've actually always put the references with it so people don't. But, it's something that if you go to PubMed and put levels of testosterone and violence, you will find thousands of studies on that. You could also find connections between zinc, vegetarianism, and violence. Because your best source of zinc, as far as like biologically absorbable, are things like oysters or red meat. So if you're a vegan, that's never part of your diet. But just look at throughout world history, who's been at war the longest, and you'll see it's the countries like. I mean, I'm not making this up. How long has Iran been in conflict with Iraq? Forever. Right? And they've been low testosterone forever. How many times have you heard that Brazil's at war with somebody? Never. Why? Because the Brazilians, they have the highest testosterone levels, right? So when you have a population that has high testosterone, they tend to be quite peaceful.
We started this podcast talking about Ed Sekoto briefly. You've mentioned mindfulness in this episode. I want to read something to you very briefly and let you comment. I think you'll know the author. If you don't, I will remind you. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. I think for me, that Bruce Lee line is just the most fabulous expression of Eastern philosophy kind of reduced to one little simple paragraph.
I mean, Bruce Lee has shaped a lot of my thinking, by the way. Because one of the things he said a long time ago is, use what is useful, reject what is not. So when he created Jeet Kune Do, he took the best of every martial art and blended it all. There's some stuff from some martial arts that he thought were stupid, and he left them out. And when people ask me, who influenced my strength training philosophy the most, I actually say Bruce Lee, because it was the mindset of, Bruce Lee said, there's a difference between martial arts for movies and martial arts for fighting in real life. He said it makes as much sense to kick someone in the face than to punch him in the toe. In other words, it looks great in the movie, but if you know somebody knows how to fight, when you kick him to the face, it gives a lot of warning, right? So a punch to the face is more effective than a kick to the face. You kick the guy in the face while he's already been knocked out. So on the way down, you reinforce your position of dominance. That quote by Bruce Lee is very true. Often when people ask me who was one of the most influential people in your career, it is Bruce Lee.
There's a great clip of him. It's a casting call video clip. I think he's like 24, 25 years of age, somewhere in Hollywood or something. And he's got a suit on, and you could see the magnetic personality. And they're asking him some questions in this casting call. And they say, well, can you give us a little demonstration? He's got a suit on. They give us a little demonstration of some of your kicks or punches or something. And so they bring some older white guy out to stand there, and to watch the speed at which he throws a punch to not hit this man in the face. And the guy's kind of scared because he's kind of got, and the funny, the great confidence thing about Bruce Lee at that moment, he's like, no, don't worry, I won't touch you. And he is throwing that punch so hard and so fast, anybody would probably have fear. And he's just like, don't worry, I won't touch you.
You love what he did. No need for discipline. Put the hours in. Actually, he was in the sporting world, he was actually one of the earliest proponents of strength training. Actually, my karate sensei lifted weights because Bruce Lee did. He says, if that guy is that fast and he lifts weight, therefore weight training must make him fast. And Bruce Lee said really early, he dispelled the myth of being muscle bound. He said, you want to get fast, you got to lift some weights.
Yeah, his body's, look, I'm not saying it is a weird thing, but his body is amazing. And to see his body strength when he does some of those push-ups on one or two fingers or something, obviously the man was in insane strength.
Oh, yes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Charles, I've kept you for too long. I would love to chat again in the future. I think we could go on for hours. StrengthSensei.com. You are traveling the world. I would love to know some of the physical clues to jet lag that you figured out, some of the physical tricks and tips. But where will you be next? And you've got this. Is it a world tour right now? You're just a man on the road? What's going on?
Right now, I'm leaving Sydney tomorrow. I'll be teaching in Montreal. Then I'll be teaching in England, possibly Malaysia. So I've got quite a bit of a tour, but all my events are on StrengthSensei.com. If you look at the world tour, and then there's a map of the world, so we made it really idiot-proof. You just click on the country that interests you, or we could go by the events. But, that's a thing we could talk about on the next podcast, is how to fight jet lag. I've traveled so much in my life that there's no way I would have done what I've done if I didn't know how to manage jet lags perfectly. And there's ways to nutrition timing where the key, Michael, is to behave like the locals when you land. And there's a series of tricks to do that. And if you want me to share that with you on a future podcast, I would gladly do it. Yeah,
that'd be great. That'd be great. And I'll have to take a look at your schedule and connect with your assistant too. Maybe the next time you're in Asia, I can come to get in your location or something. So
that would be great.
Yeah. Hey, great conversation. Like I said, I know by the way the experiences you have, the people that you've trained with, the people that you have trained. I know people are going to really love this podcast because they can just pull insights from here and there. So a world of experience. Thank you, Charles, for your time.
Thank you, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.